Hi everybody, it's part 2 of my Q&A video. I have changed my shirt so that you know that this is part 2, just to be totally transparent. This video is going to be all about books, which is what this channel is made for, so I'm a little bit more comfortable talking about this kind of stuff. And we will start with your robot friends question, which was there a particular comic book that got you into the genre? And was there a particular one, or perhaps a nonfiction book, that made you decide to study them? So the comic book that got me into the genre and made me decide to study them at the same time is V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. I don't actually think that this is a particularly amazing comic book, and I know that I'm sort of in the minority on this, but the art itself is really basic, and I don't love it. And there is some very strange things going on here with feminist topics. But that was sort of the reason that I decided to study comic books, was because as an undergraduate I read this and I saw the movie, and I was thinking that the movie tried really hard to appeal to its potential female viewers when the comic book didn't, and it seemed like there was an implicit audience in the comic book that did not include me. And so that made me really curious about other graphic novels, and specifically graphic novel adaptations. So I wasn't reading comic books a lot before I decided to study them. One nonfiction book that made me decide to study them was Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, and this is actually for maybe a different reason than you're thinking too. I wasn't particularly inspired by this book, but I felt like there was a lot that this book sort of like introduced that people could jump off from, and the more that I read in comic studies, the more that I realized that people hadn't jumped off from this point, that they were taking this sort of for granted. I felt like there could be a lot more done in theory. Now, since I was studying this in my master's degree, there has been a lot done with the theory, and good stuff is starting to come out, but it took a long time for comic books, and they're still fighting to gain legitimacy. Amanda Center asked me, what are the elements that would make up or do make up your favorite book? Like, what would my ideal book contain? And I really like reading violent books. I like when there's a little gore, and I like when there's a little suspense through violence. And I just like I'm gonna sound like a psychopath, but I just kind of like thinking about violence, thinking about our violent tendencies, perhaps our violent nature, how we redeem ourselves from that kind of violence, what kind of violence is good violence or bad violence or whatever. So I like violent books. I like violent movies too. I also really like books that deal with kind of extreme religions. I came from a background that was a pretty extreme religion. I grew up Mormon, by the way. I guess I can reveal that. I don't know why I'm hesitant to reveal that. I think because it's like people might make assumptions about me that are just completely untrue and never were, but there you go. If you have questions about that, let me know. But I like books that talk about religious upbringings because I relate to them, and I think that it's important for me to see kind of the different paths that people took, and that feels very validating. The Book Fox asked me what is the worst book that I have ever read, and I don't know that I can say what the very worst is, but I will say that one book that I absolutely hated was The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. God, that book was so awful. We read it for a children's book club that I was a part of, and they all loved it, which made the book even that much worse. But it's basically a book about a little Nazi child, a child of Nazi parents, whatever. Maybe he's not a Nazi child, but he is living at a concentration camp, and he like meets across the fence a little Jewish boy, and you know, he's wearing the striped pajamas, and the child, I can't remember how old he was, but he was old enough to know better, and he would be like, oh, he's wearing these striped pajamas and he's getting skinnier, I don't know why. And it's like, even at 4 years old, you know, not only are you being indoctrinated with that kind of stuff in 1940s Germany, but you also like understand things about sickness and death and you know, like treating people poorly. So it was just so naive, offensively naive, and using a topic that is extremely important and sensitive and real for your like narrative moral purposes. It was just so off base, and I felt like that book was like not only bad, just badly written, but also super offensive. The other question that the Book Fox asked was, how many books do I own? I've never counted them, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4 bookshelves in here, 5, 6 out in my hallway, 7 in my kitchen, and then a giant 8th one in my bedroom, and they are all completely full. A lot of them are double stacked, so the short answer is too many. Conrad at the Duckled Edge asked if you could pick only one book to teach for 5 years, what would it be? And then another one of his questions was, please explain why you like Hemingway in a way that is actually convincing, which I don't know that I can do. Hemingway is definitely acquired taste, but I'm gonna combine those two together and maybe piss Conrad off and say that the book that I would teach for 5 years is The Sun Also Rises. Students respond to this, I feel like, very well. They are not always on board. They don't always love it. In fact, I would say it's probably about half and half that just really hate this book, and making students read things that they hate has some value, I think. But also, it seems to be like right on the right level for undergraduates, at least, where they're starting to see that some of the language might have like a real rhetorical purpose and a narrative purpose rather than just telling a story, or a political purpose too, or an ideological purpose. Like there seems to be something about Hemingway that they can believe in this book, that it's not just a story, that there might be, you know, everybody talks about the iceberg with Hemingway, that there might be more under the surface with Hemingway. Whereas like if you try to teach more accessible books or books that are maybe more conventional, you get a lot of kind of pushback against like you trying to find symbols or whatever. They think like, no, the author just wanted that to be, that's just a shoe. It's not, it doesn't mean like it's the poverty of the working class. It's just a shoe or whatever. That was a good example. So yeah, I think that this one works well in a classroom. And if I'm trying to convince you to like Hemingway, which I don't think that I can do, I'm gonna read this little passage. It says, enjoying living was learning to get your money's worth and knowing when you had it, you could get your money's worth. The world was a good place to buy in. It seemed like a fine philosophy. In 5 years, I thought, it will seem just as silly as all the other fine philosophies I've had. Perhaps that wasn't true, though. Perhaps as you went along, you did learn something. I did not care what it was all about. All I wanted to know was how to live in it. Maybe if you found out how to live in it, you learned from that what it was all about. I think that there's so much hope and pessimism and optimism all wrapped up in that little passage, and through the most simple and even simplistic language, he can kind of like jump back and forth between just utter hopelessness and also I think a kind of like really pleasant letting go. And I think for me that wraps up the time period and it wraps up modernism and even postmodernism for me. I just think that Hemingway was pretty astounding in the way that he could pack ideas into such a small place. Now, I'm totally fine with whoever not liking Hemingway, and I do get it. And I wouldn't even say it's an acquired taste. It's definitely not, actually. I think that if you read it and you like it, something about his just like jabbing language really resonates with you, and it resonates with me. Another question that Conrad asked is, what's a book you like that your husband doesn't, and vice versa? And my husband is actually not a big reader. He can read, he knows how to read. And he's a very smart person, but he doesn't love novels especially. He'll read some nonfiction. And so we don't read the same books at all. Lately we've been reading out loud to each other and it's just been goosebumps. It's fun. It's really fun. But like, yeah, he reads some nonfiction and it's always like really along his interests. So he likes rap and hip hop, so he reads a lot about that. He reads some celebrity memoirs of celebrities he's interested in. He really loves pro wrestling on like a really intellectual level. Like he has convinced me why pro wrestling is pretty brilliant. So he reads a lot about that. And so yeah, I don't even know how to answer this question because every book that I love, he hasn't read. And every book that he loves, I haven't read, so we're a bad married couple in that way. But that being said, Conrad also asked which books I love on a purely like tangible material basis, and my husband is very supportive of my obsessive reading habits, and so for my birthday he got me this McSweeneys collection. So the binding of it, it's like cloth bound and it's so pretty, and then It's 2 parts here, and it's got the book, which I don't know if you guys have ever owned a McSweeneys book. This is my first because they're like really expensive. But the paper is really thick and just like satisfying, and the book itself is pretty, and it's just a collection of great McSweeney stuff. And then it came with this book box too that is a sea scene, and then you open it and it's full of little pamphlets and little books. Like here's one, for example, called Poor Little Egg Boy Hatched in a Shoal. And so that it's got just all these little examples of McSweeney's short writings and chapbooks and stuff, which it's beautiful. I can't wait to start reading this thing. Sarai at Sarai Talks Books asked me what my favorite book to TV or film adaptation is, and for me that is Where the Wild Things Are. Here's a little book, here's a movie. I did a little video on this and I'll link that down below, but I just was really blown away by the consideration to audience here. The movie could have been meant for a lot of different audiences, and the fact that Spike Jonze chose people what I think are in their 20s and 30s and are kind of like looking nostalgically back on childhood, and the way that he thought about nostalgia and his choice of production design and color scheme and all of it was just really beautiful. I loved that movie. Kate Howe asked me which classics are really intimidating to me, and that would be James Joyce's Ulysses. Because I was not an English major in undergrad or my master's degree, and then because I studied American Lit, I never studied James Joyce in school, and now I just feel like I can't do it. I'll read a few pages and I'll just think, like so many other people do, what? No. And I'll just put it aside. So I, someday need to read this. If I'm going to call myself a doctor of literature, is that what I am, I guess? I probably need to read James Joyce at some point, but it's just so intimidating to me. Clarissa asked me what some of my favorite short story collections are, and I would like to do a top 5 video so that I could talk about more, but I think my very favorite is What We Talk About When We Talk About Love by Raymond Carver. I think that this is Carver at his best because he is really pared down his language to just the essentials, and the way that he can do that in a short story and still convey these like really complex human emotions and the way that we interact with each other is quite beautiful. But yeah, I have a lot of favorite short story collections, and I'd like to talk more about those because I don't really talk about short stories that often. Lee Hope asked any sort of book genre or type that I just can't read or I'm not interested in reading. Romance was sort of like the last one that I really hadn't tried at all, and it turns out that I'm not interested in reading romance. So that's one. And then she also asked what my biggest inspiration is when it comes to academic writing, and my answer to that is Catherine Stockton. I don't do queer theory in my work in comic books, and I don't really talk that much about gender, actually. I do when I talk about Wonder Woman, but that's it. But I just think that her way of talking about the personal mixed with the academic and the level of thought in her work is really astounding. It blows me away, and I'm not saying that I understand everything that she writes, but she's just brilliant, and being in the presence of her writing is like a treat in itself. Night Owl asked me what are some of my favorite books by non-American authors, and as you know, I study American Lit, so I mostly read books from the US right now, but I love the Wind-Up Bird Chronicles. If you're going to read Haruki Murakami, I say that you should read this. A lot of people start with Norwegian Wood or Sputnik Sweetheart for some reason, maybe because they're like considered very accessible, or I don't know why those two got so famous, but the Wind-Up Bird Chronicles is like his best, and I think that that's unequivocal. Like, it's his absolute best. You should try this one. If you haven't liked Murakami in the past, this book is just like really crazy and such a joy to read. And also I'm interested in Sublime, and this has stuff about the Sublime. So yeah, I just wanted to throw in the Wind-Up Bird Chronicles because I haven't talked about it yet on this channel, and it's one of my favorites. Another book that I love that's not by an American author is Madame Bovary by Flaubert. And I have like a cute story about this one. Since it's Q&A time, why not tell a cute story? Or it's a disturbing story, depending on what lens you look through. So when my husband proposed to me a few weeks before, he asked me, what's a book that you haven't read that you've always wanted to read? And I said, oh, you know, I've been meaning to read Madame Bovary and I never have. So to propose to me, he went to the store and he bought me Madame Bovary, and he bought me this adorable little doggy bookmark, and on it said, like, will you marry me? I don't need to show that part, that's too private. But Madame Bovary is about a woman who gets married, gets really bored, and goes and has an affair. So I think that it is like the perfect book to propose to somebody with, right? Because either it's an open invitation, like, here, model your life on Madame Bovary, or it's like a really scary warning. And I just think that's so funny. Like I said, he's not a big reader, so he got me Madame Bovary to propose. How romantic. Memento Mori asked me if there are modern day superheroes that I've been a fan of, and there definitely are. Right now, I have been following the Civil War II event that Marvel is doing. I really love Marvel. So I have been reading and really enjoying Vision. Vision is like the one superhero comic that I will recommend to everyone right now. It's so good. I think there have been 7 of them on this run. The art is beautiful, and it's just like a lot about like what it would be like living as an android cyborg guy in the suburbs with your little android cyborg family. It's really good, Vision. And then I've been liking the new Iron Man, especially International Iron Man has been pretty good, and it's been really funny. Doctor Strange has been pretty good lately. I like the new Spider-Woman. She's pregnant, which is a great twist. I really like Worst X-Men Ever. That's over now, but that was a 5-issue arc that was great. Oh, the all-new Wolverine is so good. I feel like people are getting way into Lumberjanes and Squirrel Girl, and those are meant for, I think, a younger audience, so I'm not super into those. I don't like the slang and stuff that they use, but the all-new Wolverine has a very similar tone, but like just superhero-y, more violent, and more for adults. I just really like that one. So those are some modern superheroes that I've been reading. I haven't really been doing a lot with DC lately, but I think that Marvel's been really fun. Oh, and of course Ms. Marvel, everybody's been talking about that for good reason. Ms. Marvel is great. Captain Marvel is doing some interesting things. I'm not loving the storyline, but I'm loving like how that character is developing. So there you go. If you want to talk Marvel, let me know. And then he also asked if I were ever an X-Men reader and who my favorite X-Men is. And I have read a lot of X-Men. I love the X-Men. That movie franchise is the one that, like, no matter what, I'm going to go see those movies and I'm going to love them. Even the worst one, even X-Men 3, which is like the worst one for sure. I liked it. It was fun. It was super fun. I just like those movies. And Kitty Pryde's my favorite. I wish that she didn't hook up with Colossus. That seems like such a strange pairing to me. But I guess she sees something in Colossus that I don't. Anyway, I'm going down a nerd track here. Kitty Pryde, favorite X-Men. Viva Story asked me what my favorite bookstores are, and are there any bookstores that you haven't visited yet but plan on visiting someday? I have this one bookstore in Chicago that I've heard about that is just horror that I would love to go see. But my very favorite bookstore, I think, is Powell's in Portland. I went there as like a really impressionable 18-year-old on like a trip with friends, and we just spent the whole day in Powell's, and it was like a special experience for me, so I loved that. Another great experience I had with bookstores was in the French Quarter in New Orleans. I went to a bookstore that was all cookbooks, and it was like very curated. Like the guy that worked there knew about cookbooks. It was like quite amazing. And I also went to the Faulkner bookstore there, which is in William Faulkner's old house, which was really cool. It's a Reading Thing asked me if I could visit any fictional world, where would you go? And I think I, like everyone else, would choose Hogwarts. I'm not going to be pretentious with this. Like, Hogwarts is obviously the coolest place ever, and I was just talking about it last night. I feel like I talk about Hogwarts way more than the average person, and I was talking about how I would want to really put all my focus into potions. Too bad like Snape teaches it, although I have always liked getting approval from very difficult professors, and unfortunately with my social habits and ambition I would probably be a Slytherin, so maybe Snape would like me a lot. Anyway, potions just seems very cool. I just have a lot of Hogwarts thoughts. Hogwarts would be awesome. That's What She Read asked me what's a popular book that you don't like, and I'm going to tie this into View from the Bars question. We had this really brilliant comment about thinking about like what our sort of knee-jerk reaction is to popular culture, and it was all about Jonathan Franzen. So I will say, at the end of that question, he asked me if I like Jonathan Franzen, and I will say that a popular book that I did not like was The Corrections. It was just so cynical, and I really get along with my family, and I love my family, and I think that there is power in kind of like family bonds. And I don't agree with my family about most things, but they are the most important people in my life. And so I didn't like appreciate the sort of like approach he was taking towards family in that book. So when View from the Bar asked me like how I felt about like Jonathan Franzen, that's the only Franzen novel that I've read. I've read some of his essays, and then I've watched him in interviews, and like I hate the guy. I hate him. Seems like a snob, and he's pretentious, and he shit talks all of the things that I love, which is like pop culture. So he's not my favorite. So View from the Bar's question is if I feel any discord between a book's popularity or lack thereof and your feelings toward it. Do you ever feel like a chump to fall in legit love with something that was made with mass market appeal in mind? And as somebody who studies superhero comics, no, I don't feel like a chump. I feel like loving things that are popular is one of the most sincere things that you can do, and this hipster attempt to love all this esoteric underground stuff is kind of backwards. To me, it makes people seem so artificial and like they're trying so hard. The coolest people are the ones that have like taste all over the board. Like they like the underground stuff and they like the super popular stuff that they can find value in. So I don't feel like a chump at all. And just for the record, I'm not even saying that I hate Jonathan Franzen's writing. I didn't get along with The Corrections on sort of like ethical levels. Like I just didn't sort of agree with the approach or the lens that he was using. I don't like him as a person though. That wouldn't prevent me from reading his other books, but they haven't been high on my to-do list, and they're so long, so that committing to purity or freedom seems like a really big project, and like it has a high level of risk for me. Literary Gladiators asked me if I was teaching an American literature class, what would be the most recent work or author you would include in your curriculum, and for me that is The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy. This book was published in 1994, so maybe it doesn't get us like right up to date with literature, but I think that it is dealing with a lot of things that are very contemporary, and that a lot of contemporary literature and especially literary theory are contending with right now, which is that it's about border crossings and liminal space and third space and all of that kind of border theory type stuff. So I would probably finish the conversation with something that deals with border theory, and if I'm going to do that, I'm going to use probably my favorite book. That's such a hard thing for me to say because I love a lot of different kinds of books, but The Crossing I think is my favorite. It's such a beautiful, beautiful novel. Susan Powers asks what I read for pure pleasure, like what kind of books I just read to like escape from, and I always have a really hard time answering this question. A lot of people ask me because they feel like I'm maybe doing like too much work when I'm reading, but really, honestly, I swear this is true. That's what I get pleasure from doing. So even the like generic stuff that I read to escape, the part of escape that I like when I read is thinking about theory and thinking about politics and where a book falls into a social pattern and all of that. So it's nerdy, I know, and it seems unbelievable that that would be how I read for fun, but it really is. I don't like turn off that part of me when I read anything. I don't even do it when I watch sitcoms. Like I just really like studying. So that's what I do for fun. The last question is from the Library Lush, and she asked what artist and writer I would like to pair up to do a comic. And for me, the answer is Fiona Staples, who does the art for Saga. I think her art is like really appealing, really clean in a way that I like. And I personally like when comics can do a lot with a simple style. So I love her art. And then the guy that's writing Vision right now, Tom King, I would like to see them come together. I think that they could do a lot together, and I think that the sensibility of Vision and Saga are kind of similar, so that we could get even more comics that I love so much because I love Saga and Vision. Okay, I have been talking for an hour and a half answering questions about myself. I've been talking about myself for an hour and a half, which normally I love to do, but I'm tired. I hope you liked this video. Let me know if you made it through, and I hope you guys have a great 4th of July weekend if you're celebrating. Everybody should celebrate 4th of July, right? Bye!